work being an organizer with Cesar Chavez as how he learned a lot about restorative justice and the whole move of understanding nonviolence. He says it really led him to understand the pain, injustice, and nature of violence in society, and through the learnings of Cesar Chavez. And also he's been quite the follower of Martin Luther King, obviously, but has always been a real committed promoter of the values of nonviolence. He's had a long history, as I said, as an organizer for Cesar Chavez, but he's also been very committed to abolition of the death penalty. When I was working on something that's called participatory defense, and some of us consider it to be restorative justice, but he has been very active for many years to work to abolish the death penalty, working with Sister Helen Prejean. Some of you might know her book, Dead Man Walking, and been very involved with her in that whole effort. And he's also been, given the fact that he comes from a migrant family from Mexico, he started much of his life working with those that have come to this country seeking a better life and not having the documents and papers. So we've worked quite a bit on asylum seekers, but what we ended up in El Salvador many years ago in the 90s. And in that time, he linked, through some of the work I was doing with a nonprofit called Save the Children, it led us to connect with the first waves of young youth that were being deported from the United States, primarily from Los Angeles, because of the conflicts in the 80s. They grew up in some of the toughest neighborhoods in LA, and we connected with them. And that is really what we're going to be talking about tonight, because of the work we did with these young people and what an impact he had in many of their lives, although many lost their lives, an impact he had in the way he approached working with them and how much they became actually a part of our family. So with that, I would like to introduce my husband, Leno Rose-Avila.
Buenas noches, can you hear me?
Yes.
So one of the things that you find out in life is that some of us are able to plan our trajectory about what we want to do, where we want to go. I'm not one of those. I was, my life shifted with the winds. I probably should be in prison right now for some of the things that I did. But because I was able to find nonviolence and get out of there, one of my big influences on how to work with the community was Malcolm X. Because, you know, I was a drug dealer and giving discounts to people of color, and I thought that was great. And he said, clearly, you cannot pimp your community if you want to help them, and you've got to stand up for them. And so I was lucky that I got out of that. So when we went to El Salvador, you got to know that there was a dirty war going on in El Salvador that from 79 to 92, and it caused about 1 million Salvadorans to flee to the United States, and most of them went to LA. And they fled, and it was a war that we supported. We spent billions of dollars for them to massacre people. And the youth came to the United States. The parents were and I have a lot of friends who came during that time. And at the same time, we were doing demonstrations with actors in LA against the war on a regular basis. So that when they came to LA, they were trying to make it exist. And there's you'd think because we're people of color, Chicanos, Mexican Americans, we didn't accept the Salvadorans coming into our neighborhoods in LA. So we beat them up, we scared them, frightened them, and our big gang was 18th Street, and they formed their own group, which is now called MS-13, which is Mara Salvatrucha 13. And Mara doesn't mean gang, it means gathering of people. Salva is Salvadorian, and Trucha means that you're on top of things. So by the time we went to work in El Salvador, Carolyn, who was working for Save the Children, said, why don't you go represent Save the Children at a couple of meetings? I said, I don't want to meet any more Salvadorans. I know a lot of them. She said, well, go represent us. And there I met, because of Pete Wilson's 187 efforts in California, they deported a lot of immigrants, and just the same way as Trump is doing now. And a lot of them were gang members. And I went to meetings and I met gang members. I don't know if you've ever fallen in love, but I saw these guys and I said, man, this is going to be a great date. So I invited myself to their neighborhoods and started hanging out with them and learning. It turns out that we all ate at the same taco stands. Tommy's Original, which is the best hamburger stand in LA for gangsters. And they were all very leery of me because I was a Chicano Mexican American, not Salvadoran. And they wanted to know what I wanted to do with them. And I didn't have anything. I didn't want to do anything. I just wanted to know their experience, sort of an anthropological study. And they had been shunned by their family. They could only live an X number of city blocks in El Salvador without getting shot. So I spent about 60 days just hanging out with two of the big rival gang members. And the thing that I learned about gangs early, I got to tell you, I made a lot of mistakes. I should be dead by now. And the guys told me, you were so stupid. The things you said, the things you did. Because in Salvador, you pay $75 and people take your life. And so what I learned that the government was telling lies about gang members. So I convinced Carolyn to give some money from Save the Children and Rada Barden in Sweden. And we interviewed 1,025 gang members. Only study of its kind internationally ever that was helped, designed by gang members and implemented by gang members and analyzed by gang members. And what we found is that everybody wanted the same thing. They wanted out of violence, and they wanted jobs and income and education. And they didn't want their children to become part of it. But you can imagine for 60 days, I'm meeting with leadership from two major gangs. And I really, when I was involved in gangs, it was gang lights. It wasn't this organized thing with automatic weapons and hand grenades and everything. And so I'm talking to people that were arch enemies. So finally, I convinced them to do a study. There's nothing worse than gang members or people in criminal elements that they want information gathered about them. So that was a big discussion. What will happen with the information? And we worked with the Jesuit University. It was kind of interesting. It was like being in a war zone, and I was a peacemaker going between two groups, and they hated each other. Eventually, on the last day before we implemented the study, we brought them both groups together, and we were at the Jesuit University, and I said, we're going to implement this study. It's to the benefit of all gang members. And we were in a room, 11 18th Street people, 11 Mara Salvatrucha people. These are people that had killed each other's brothers or neighbors or gang members. Everybody had payback on their mind. And I was rather frightened. The university was frightened because all it took was one guy pulling out a knife or pulling out a gun, and it would have been a massacre at the university. And the meeting was very contentious, but we got through that meeting. So I said, promise me you won't shoot anybody with a clipboard for a month. They go, okay, we'll do that. And then I got another crazy idea. I said, why don't you come to our house and have lunch? And we ordered a lot of pollo campero, which is like Popeye's chicken in El Salvador. And once we saw that people really ate and they could settle down a little bit, there wasn't the shoulders weren't tense, the hair wasn't up on the back of the neck. And one of the things that I found out is that, when I have all these ideas about teaching nonviolence, and I really don't know what I'm talking about because I've never been in violence. I never suffered the way these kids did, wasn't torn from my family. And what I decided is we went along and learned about these things is that we had to bring people together. And you talk about restorative justice. The first thing is they ripped off their families that were in the United States that tried to save them. They stole from their families, they embarrassed them. They went to prison, they became persona non grata in the neighborhood, and the families hated them. And so I figured I got to figure out a way to connect them at some way, and it wasn't easy. So one of the things that I learned is that when you're dealing with people that have been in the gangs, in El Salvador anyway, and East Los Angeles, where we opened up another office, and Alex Sanchez, who runs Unidos there, is really the hero and knows better how to do this work than I did. because I stumbled all over myself. But I figured out that one thing is they wanted discipline. That's what the gang gives them. They wanted family. That's what the gang gives them. They wanted somebody to honor them. So my job was to recognize them, honor their self-esteem. Second was to find somebody who loves them. You know, love is a powerful thing. And the third was to find a spiritual life for them. I didn't care whether evangelical, Jewish, Catholic, congregational, Baha'i, whatever they want to be, they could join it. But I think that, and I would tell them, and they said, well, why do we need love and spiritualness? I said, you know, when the world's falling apart, is if you have faith, some spirituality, and you have somebody that you know that loves you, you're probably going to make it out okay. And they would tell me, you know, we're risking our lives to do this. And we went through a long process with the parents in LA so that they could get back with their children and start to heal. That was the first healing. We were able to heal between the gang members, to talk about the violence, what it means, so here I have at our house on a regular basis about 30 gang members, rival gang members, 18th Street and Mara Salvatrucha, MS-13, and they're sitting around eating and working and talking about how to resolve this conflict. Because the easiest thing that when you're in a gang or in prison is payback. Somebody does something to you, then your side's got to go get revenge. And we would talk about that all the time. And it was amazing because the first restorative justice we did was with each other and talking about it and them sitting in a room and saying about what we did. What was interesting when we opened our office in LA is I was doing a fundraiser. So I took this gangster, Alex Sanchez, who's now head of Homies Unidos, to help me with a fundraiser. And he'd never spoken in public, never been in the white part of Los Angeles, but he was the MS-13 leader. And I said, Alex, you know, after I do all these things, great things we're doing, you're the real thing. You talk a little bit about your experience in the neighborhoods and with gangs. And in the middle of his talk, he started talking about all the people that he had lost on his side to the violence, and then people that he knew on the other side that they had killed. And he started crying. I said, wow, this gangster's crying. And I was crying. Everybody cried. Because he really felt the loss and wished that he could heal his community. And it was the most emotional revival meeting I've been to, and because it came from the heart. Got into the car as we were leaving, and I was still stunned by what he did. And I said, hey, Alex, I'm still the head of Homies Unidos. Don't you ever do better than I did. He said, man, he said, you know, we've lost too many lives, and I got to talk about it. And several other occasions, and I both made presentations and talked about the people we lost. I think it's hard. One of the hardest groups that I've ever talked to about giving up stuff or not taking revenge and learning a better way was with the gang members there and teaching them also a better way, because, you know, we had some violations of our membership. Young girl stole Carolyn's ring that her father bought for her, and so we had to do a big investigation. And so the gangs, if you haven't been to them anyway in El Salvador, they have courts. Just everybody presents the evidence and everybody does stuff. But the penance or the penalty can be everything from a beating to a stabbing to a rape to disappearance of your body. And I had to convince him, you know, there's another way of disciplining people. And it doesn't include violence, but it's a way to bring them together. And this one gal who did the theft, and we found the ring and found her called La Gatita, a beautiful young 15-year-old. She was scared out of her life. And I said, well, you got to come to court, because if these guys see you on the street, they might do something. But it was great watching gang members say, you know, how could you defy, you know, friendship and everything? And gives them a sense of community. And over the years, as we connected them with their families in LA, they became very, very smart. But, you know, they're the toughest group that I've ever worked with. We had 5 of our leadership killed. We had drive-by shooting of our office. I had serious threats on my life. I had to go out in the middle of gang stabbings and shootings to save people with gang members from both sides and put my life at risk. And I said, why am I doing this? But you know, one guy that we saved, Pelon, or the bald one, he was a charismatic Pied Piper. He used to walk through El Salvador with about 30 to 50 gang members following him. But one night somebody decided to take over and they shot him 3 times. I got a call from 18th Street and they wanted me and some MS people to go sit outside his hospital room so they wouldn't kill him. Prior to that, Pelon thought I was just, you know, I wasn't the real deal. But he knew after we risked our lives all night to sit outside the hospital. And so when he came out of the hospital, first place he came was to our house to thank homies and to get in, you know, so that we could get working together. But I think that the tougher the audience, the tougher it is to get people together. And as I said, we made a lot of mistakes. You know, the first times I talked about nonviolence or forgiveness and all of this business and reconnecting with your victims, people were tagging and smoking cigarettes and going to the bathroom and weren't listening to me. And I was spending our money, Carolyn's and my money, to keep the organization afloat. So I got really angry and I was going to give up. And one day I said, maybe it's me that I don't know how to communicate. So I said, what do they like to do most? The only vehicle we had was my Dodge van. So I said, well, let's go for a ride in the Dodge van. We piled in as many homies as we could. And, you know, you got to pump up the beat. You know, the music's got to be loud and you got to get in the rhythm. And then I would ask a question and about something that had been in the press about gangs. And then we'd go back to the music and then back to a question. And each time the discussion became longer. I knew I had him one day when we were getting into the van and they said, what are we talking about, Holmes? I go, oh man, it took a while, but I got him. Because some people have been through so much trauma. You know, a lot of the women with the gangs have been raped by family members, have been raped by other gang members, and the trauma, and even to think about forgiving somebody. And other people who sat across from our meeting room who had shot at each other, stabbed close neighbors to get them to talk about it and to talk about love. And I had to teach them how to talk to their parents about love and how to express it. On one of my birthdays, we're having a big celebration, and Amilcar Duran, who's, we used to call him, what was his name, his apodo? Anyway, he's a gang member who worked with Carolyn at Save the Children, got him a job there.
Oh, Booby.
Booby. And so yeah. Booby, as people were going out to the patio for my birthday fiesta, he stayed behind and my nickname is the bear, El Oso. So I'm Papa Oso, because I'm the head of the clan, man. I'm a bad dude. And so he said, hey, Papa Oso, I'm gonna talk to you alone. So, and you know, for the gang members, I had brought back, a number of them had never had stuffed animals. So I brought stuffed animals for them because I said we never had the money. I never had the pleasure of having toys. I was always out on the street. So I'd been through this with a lot of gang members. So there's me and Booby, we locked the door. He pulls from behind his back and tries to hand at me. You know, you've seen those little Hallmark things that have a little teddy bear and happy birthday. And I said, what's up with that, Holmes? And he says, and Booby says, you know what's up, Magdaleno, just take it. I said, no, Holmes, I don't know what you're trying to tell me. He says, just take it, homie. I said, I'm not taking it. He says, yes, you are. I'm going to force it on you. I said, okay, Booby, let me just ask. Are you trying to say you love me? He goes, yeah, man. And I said, I love you too. You know, powerful moment, me and Booby alone. And you have to find a safe spot to move people. But I think when you do, you get them closer to be able to admit the pain of you know, living on the streets, the pain of seeing people around you die, of seeing your family pulled away from you. But the thing that I learned is that I wasn't as smart as I thought I was. That these gang people, just like people who are coming out of the prison, are very smart. I started working with prisoners in 1969 in Colorado, and a lot of them came out brilliant brothers and sisters. Some of our best knowledge from our neighborhoods are in prison. And you know, Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow was a great book. But about 10 years before that, I was with gang members in Berkeley at a conference held by Angela Davis about the prison industrial complex. So she was way ahead of it. So every time you think about who were the pioneers, Michelle's book was great, but Angela has always been there for us. And I was impressed. And you know, there was maybe 1,000 people at the conference, and about 400 of them were gang members, African-American, Latino, Asian, a couple of Russian gang members. But I think, you know, when you're reaching out to people and you want to start a conversation, it's not as easy, but it's important, because part of the thing that I learned was is that you have things that you can learn in the process. I'll give you a quick story.
Okay, you get 2 minutes.
Okay, quick story. I'd always been poor. I finally got a job with Legal Services. So I brought gifts to all of my family home for Christmas. And I hadn't been there for about 6 months. And my brother, who was the oldest in the clan there, when I arrived at Mano, I handed the gifts to my younger brothers and sisters, my dad a gift, my mother a gift. And then my brother, Mano, who I really loved. In those days, a $50 bill was a big thing. I handed it to him and he said, "I can't take it." I said, "What do you mean you can't take it?" He says, "I can't take it." And so I stuffed it in his pocket and he threw it on the floor. And I said, nobody refuses my Christmas gift. Before I knew it, I had him by the throat. I had him on the floor, banging his head on the floor. And I said, "Nobody refuses my Christmas gift." My mother's hitting me with the broom, everybody's screaming, because I had a bad temper. And I'm choking him. I outweigh him by about 100 pounds. And finally I'm yelling at him. I said, "Why don't you take my gift?" He goes, "I don't know if you love me." I go, "Wow. I've never had to express my love to my brother." So I did. And we're both crying. And he said, "You can stop choking me and get off of me." And then he asked for more money. So I guess we're ready for question and answers.
Wait, I'd just like to add a couple of final comments.
This is what I was afraid of.
Because in reminiscing on this period of time in our life, since I worked in this international development field, there are all these major institutions that are donors, like the Inter-American Development Bank or the World Bank or USAID with the US government, et cetera, et cetera. And the issue of gang violence was something that has an interesting history, and it's related to our history, the US's history's foreign policy interventions in Central America that triggered so many of the migrants coming north, and which is what's still happening today, because we've never come to reckoning of the role we as a country and our foreign policy have played in having created so much violence in Central America. And then for us to be having such distorted immigration policies with us not owning it. And so with all of these institutions, I remember them hearing about the work that Leno was primarily doing, and our house sort of being like a community center. And they kept saying, "Well, what's the methodology? What's the strategy?" And so we invited them all over to our house one day, these Ollie people all dressed up in suits and, having these offices up in DC and, moving lots of money around and supposedly helping everybody in the world. And they just wanted to know, what is this methodology? Because it's, it's getting famous, it's getting well known in the area. And they came over and they got to meet some of these young fellows. They actually went to the US Embassy themselves. It was really quite funny. That's another story. But finally, one fellow at the end of the evening said, "I think I've figured it out." And I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "I think I know why this has been working. You just sort of loved everybody. You just loved them. You brought them in, you brought them into your home. You didn't say you're bad, that you have to get out of what you're doing." And I really think that's a real important, understanding of the kind of work we do and working in justice and restorative justice, is love those that you're engaging with and trying to really understand where they're coming from. And anyways, that was to me a wonderful comment that that fellow had made that evening. So thank you.
Any questions?
Beautiful, thank you. Yes, please, questions.
I've got a million questions, but
Of course you do, Albert.
you know I do. I wrote in the chat for you. I have not heard anything so exciting in a long time. Okay, but my questions, two questions. Were you secretly meeting with the gangs because of the danger of the gangs? And how did you get those first gang members to come into your house?
That's a great question, Albert.
Well, I'm going to try to answer it. Albert, you know, I'm not very smart about this. You know, I was going out and hanging out them with the neighborhoods, going to their soccer games and stuff.
Well, did you tell him about the meeting though?
Which meeting?
That I told you to go to from the
Yes,
gang.
yes, I said
Okay.
that earlier. My editor's trying to get involved here. The issue was that we started bringing him over, the leadership, one by one into the house, and it was very interesting because
Different nicknames.
that we were working with, and they didn't trust me 100%, and they didn't trust Carolyn because we were living in the upper class or lower middle class or something. It was a gated community anyway. So one of the things that you find out is I never carry gossip between gangs. I never lie to people. I tell the truth, which probably saved my life. Well, an interesting story was I went back about 10 years later and I met with some of the gang members that I'd been working with. And we were having Chinese food because you can eat a lot and it's cheap. And I asked Jorge Rosales, El Shadow, I said, Jorge, I was asking him, how did you stay out of violence once I left El Salvador? And Jorge says, I have bad news and good news. And I said, what's the bad news? He said, you missed a good gang party. Man, those parties are great. And I said, then what's the good news? He says, I just graduated from law school. I go, what? We never even talked about college for you. He says, yeah, but you told me, you raised my self-esteem and told me I could do whatever I wanted to do. And so I went to, became a lawyer. Then I turned to Ugly, Feo, the guy next to me in the left side. There were about 12 of us there. And I said, Feo, what's kept you out of violence? He said, I found Jesus in El Salvador. And I made a crack. I didn't know that Jesus was lost in El Salvador. He goes, hey, homie, that's not funny, man. What do you want to say?
I want to answer Albert's question.
Okay, answer.
Albert, what happened is that he went to this meeting that I asked him to go to, where they were had invited all these gang members and the police were there. And he then connected with them, and then he just bothered them and bothered them and bothered them. He just wanted to get into their lives. They didn't trust him. He was an old Chicano in their book. That's who they fought against in LA. They didn't like people of Mexican descent. They were Salvadorans, and that they didn't know what this guy was up to. And he was always coming around, and they were always giving him another nickname. He never even knew who he was talking to, because every time he'd see the same person again, he had a different name. But I think he wore them down. Afterwards, he finally just wore them down. And he just became such a bother that they finally began to open up.
Any other questions?
Well, one point of clarity, if you would. That was one gang member at a time until you got 2 or 3 or 4 different gangs leaders that would come sit down with you?
Well, one is I made connection with a couple of guys who were head of cliques or cells, and I went with them to their meetings and started meeting all of them. I was meeting with them for about 60 days and never asked any questions. Who did you shoot? What's your crime? And they said, well, don't you have any questions? I said, no, I'm just learning here. I'll have questions later on. And so they were always asking me questions about my life with the farm workers and what I believed. But they were coming over in 2s and 3s. First, I dealt with the leadership. Primarily, my first meetings with the leadership of this groups was at Burger King. There was a Burger King there. And so when I took one group to Burger King, we ate the same hamburger and fries and same size Coke 2 hours later, I ate with the opposition. The same thing, I was getting fat. And always said the same thing to both parties. And eventually, when we really brought everybody was after the day when we decided to initiate the study. But it was very precarious, and people told us they're going to rape and kill your daughter and your wife and steal from you. You know, there's amongst organized gangs, there's a thing they call you their dog, their chucho. And if you become somebody's dog, I felt safer with them than any time I was in El Salvador if I had a couple of gang members. And one time our daughter was coming on a plane to El Salvador, and on a holiday prior to us being able to get there, she was in first class, and gentleman asked her, "Who's coming for you?" She said, "The homies," because it's about a 45-minute drive from El Salvador's airport to the city, and a lot of people die there. And she said, "Oh no, I'm fine." So she gets through customs. There's 6 gang members, you know, all tatted down in their t-shirts, and they say, "Hey, what's up, Aviva? Orale, homie." And she's 13 years of age. And Carolyn and I knew there's nobody going to touch that girl. They're going to have to go through the homies to do it, because that's their word. And that's what people don't understand is there's an honor code amongst a lot of community groups. But I think if society gave us a chance to do that, you know, how does it, you know, the women who left their homes because their stepfather or uncle raped them, how do we get them together to, even because their mother and the priest blamed them for showing too much leg or something? That's why the stepfather or the uncle raped them, and never turning in the relative into child custody. And so, and you know, there is so much pain out in the community that you begin wherever you are. And the big thing is you have to build trust to have open communications. And I never assumed that I knew more than I did.
I got one more question. I swear, I'm going to stop it. This is my last question. Are you thinking about instituting something like that here in this area?
Well, right now, I'm working a lot with Border in Tijuana, and I'm advising Homies Unidos in Los Angeles. But I'm always available to consult with people to talk about it. I don't have the time or energy right now to start a group, and it, you know, it starts out small. So a lot of big nonprofits wanted, they said, "Why don't you come under our umbrella and we'll take care of you?" And we said, because nobody had ever seen anybody organize 22 gang members. When we went into convention hall, we sat together, we marched. If you ever saw Malcolm X's Fruit of the Islam, we were like that, you know, organized, tight. And they would come up to me and they said, "Well, why don't you come join us?" I said, "Well, there's 30,000 more gang members. I've only got 22. You can have the rest of them." But other people got attracted because if you're treated decently, then you don't have to. One of the stories I can tell you is that you know, there's a lot of sexism and homophobia in a lot of countries, including ours. So one day we would meet on Saturday and for our business meeting, and then we'd pull together all our pesos, and however much money we had, if we had enough for pupusas for everybody, that's what we'd have. That's that nice cornmeal thing they make in El Salvador. If not, we would just buy tortillas and white cheese. So we decided on where to go buy the cheese and tortillas. And I told the guys, "Well, you guys go ahead if you want, but I'm going to walk through the park," because there was a park in the middle. And they said, "Why are you going through the park?" I said, "Because there's a gay parade that they're organizing there." They go, "Hey, Magdaleno, you gay?" And I said, "Well, I don't know, could be. Find out in a minute." So then they followed me over there. They had never met with transsexuals, gays, and lesbians. And what was interesting, some of the people were from their own neighborhoods and they didn't know it. And we talked about it. We said, what happens with violence in El Salvador? The police beat up on you, then you go out and you find a gay person and you beat up on them, and then they have nobody to beat up on. I say all of us that are fighting for human rights, and need to protect each other and not beat up on each other. And it was a big lesson. And so me and Weta, one of the gang members, Claudia, marched in the parade. And none of the men would march in the parade. They'd walk along the sideway. They took pictures of me so they could have proof. They say, yeah, our leader is gay. And I said, yeah, and I'm happy too. So, but I think that sometimes you have to lead by example about what you're doing and break some norms. It was one of the greatest learning. I'm still writing about some of the experience and some of the heroes. You know, Claudia, who marched with me, she's a licensed RN now. And there's a lot of other stories of people who've done good with their life, but it's very violent. We lost a lot of people to violence. And for family members, when you're split between countries and these guys can't come back or girls can't come back and be with their family members, it's very, very difficult. And we were able to provide a bridge. But I think, you know, what you're doing with restorative justice is trying to find a way to help heal people. And that's what we have to do. And it becomes in small ways and not, you know, we're going to have a 300-person convention and heal everybody. A lot of private conversations, a lot of things that people could do and learn. And a lot of stuff that I learned about just how to communicate with people and how to be upfront.
Albert, can I add one comment, if you don't mind? Because what I had said when in our little planning meeting is that the next era of the work he started in El Salvador has been shaped by this fellow Alex Sanchez, and he has a really vibrant organization in Los Angeles, as well as another branch has now developed in Denver, and they're a generation younger, and they're doing amazing work with young folks, working on preventing them and getting them to understand that it's not to their best interest to get involved in gang life or get in trouble. And so they've got an amazing, and I said earlier, I think it could be a great second part to this discussion, because they would be more than happy to share with what they're doing currently with young people and the kinds of programs that they have.
Alex Sanchez is a real hero. Anything that I did, he has surpassed by miles. And I always knew that because I was a gang light. I wasn't the serious gang stuff. So he knows how to talk to the parents. He knows how to talk to groups, the youth that they have, to try to get them to heal and understand it and move forward. And clever, they tried to deport Alex twice. The government did. And thanks to Tom Hayden, a former senator and peace activist, he was able to keep Alex from being deported. And thank you, Tom, wherever you are in this universe. And,
And clever.
Well, and Clever, so Clever took over when they were trying to deport him. Clever is about 6'5", looks like a professional linebacker. He's all muscle. And he told me one time when, because I didn't know him that well, and he was a young dude about 15 years ago. And Alex left him in charge of LA, so I went to meet with Clever. And I said, hey, Clever, you know, I got donor money I'm giving you guys, and I got to have a report for it. He said, well, you're not from my neighborhood, Holmes, and I don't have to take anything from you. You're not my boss. You're not neighborhood. You're not from my gang. And I told him, I said, well, you know, you ain't going to get any money unless you give me the report. So at one point, and we kept going back and forth on this. This is a guy who scared me. He's so strong and so much bigger than me. And I had no relationship with him. So we were suing the Ramparts Police Department in LA for all their illegal actions. We had a group meeting, we did our press conference, and I told Clever, let's talk about this after the press conference. So there was about 200 people there. I went to a corner and he came with about 6 of his gang members, homies from his neighborhood. And we just talking like, hey, what's up, Holmes? You know, just playing it. And then when nobody was looking and he looked around, he pulls out of his pocket, he goes, hey, here's your report. And I pulled out, here's your check. And after that, we were cool. But, And he's got a great program in Denver. He's done a TED Talk. He's done a police commission. And, but you can change people's lives, but they gotta heal. And Clever always reminds me, we suffer from serious PTSD, and they do. And everybody coming out of prison is the same way.
And I hope you have a link to his presentation on TED Talks.
Yeah, we can get it for you. You'll be amazed how big that dude is, man.
Yeah. But that wasn't a question, by the way.
So does anybody, anybody else would like to ask anything of Leno before we?
I have a question. So Leno, what I'm gathering is the work you did was, it was pretty much one-on-one. The healing that took place was person to person. It wasn't necessarily an organized kind of process like a circle or, you know, the more formal kinds of now what people call restorative justice. But have I got that right? Or
A lot of it was that way in the beginning, but then as a group, we would sit around and discuss it. And we would have, you know, going back to where they didn't want to meet very much, we got to the point that we could do weekend retreats. And one of them would be when we would not only talk strategic planning, but also talk about our pain and our promise to each other and why we had stuff. But when you're dealing with gangsters, a lot of times one little nod of the head or one sentence could send somebody off, and I would have to run to their house and try to chill them down so they didn't go over the edge. But it was a lot of individual work, but we did do group work talking about it because we had to be supportive of each other and understand each other. And we had a lot of precarious things. Like I say, when I went out, when people were injured and could have lost my life. I'm not a hero. I'm not invincible. I'm just an average worker doing average things.
I have a question about nonviolence. Carolyn spoke a lot about the nonviolence as an approach and whatever, and I'm curious about whether or not, obviously there are great people, Martin Luther King and others who espoused and did that, and then others built on sort of nonviolence training and stuff. And I'm just curious about whether there anything specific about the nonviolence training or whether it was just more of an overarching view, or whether there were specific trainings, you know, and principles around that you follow.
Well, Fred Ross, who was a Salolinsky trainee, was the person that organized Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta and the farm workers. And when I was out there, I was violent when I joined the United Farm Workers Movement. And I started with the women's strike. And they really taught us about why you can't put people in danger, why it's more heroic to be nonviolent. You have to be a bigger man, a bigger woman. And, you know, when I started out, I joined a strike run by women, which in 1970 were pretty sexist Latino culture at that point. And to go under the leadership of these strong women. And they were putting at risk their families. Here I'm 23, 24 years old. I'm just putting at risk my life. And I said, when you're working with people like that in a community every day, and you know that actions that you do could harm them and bring them harm, is you're very careful, and you want to be nonviolence because a lot of violence comes to you. Those of you who are interested, I'll talk about some of my nonviolent action as a striker in a story called Ingrid and Gretel and nonviolence. But I think, you know, I read a lot, but mostly I was taught by people. But you know, when I joined the union, I was violent. I was carrying 2 loaded guns, still selling drugs, and I had to give that up. And I gave up my guns, and the guys in the neighborhood thought I was effeminate because I no longer carry 2 loaded guns. But I felt more like a man because I was not afraid of anybody, with or without guns.
Okay. Anyone else have any more questions or anything else before? I know there is another item on the agenda. So.
I just want to thank you for having me to discuss this, and we can talk about other issues. But all of you that are doing community work, in particular those with people inside institutions or coming out of institutions, it's difficult to have a lot of family members that are institutionalized. And just by the grace of God, as I'm still out on the streets. But I want to thank you for talking about helping us heal, because we're in a nation of pain and we don't know it sometimes.